House on the Prairie. She was graceful, intelligent, and unshakably poised. But while the cameras captured prairie sunshine and frontier family values, something much heavier was unfolding behind one unforgettable episode in 1974. It was raw, it was personal, and it left a mark so deep that Anderson has refused to ever relive it. What happened on that set? And why does that moment still haunt her decades later? Tighten your seatbelts for this intriguing ride. How Melissa Sue Anderson started. When Melissa Sue Anderson first stepped onto the set of Little House on the Prairie, she was just 11 years old. She was a quiet but determined girl with striking blue eyes and a calm presence beyond her years. Born on September 26, 1962, in Berkeley, California, Melissa didn't come from a long line of Hollywood stars. But what she lacked in industry connections, she made up for with pure talent, discipline, and a natural grace that instantly set her apart from other young actors of her time. Before Little House, Melissa had already landed a few roles in commercials and TV shows, but nothing quite like this. The moment she got cast as Mary Ingalls, the oldest daughter in the now iconic Frontier family, her life was never the same. From the very first season, she carried herself with a quiet poise that made her character feel real. On screen, Mary was dependable, gentle, and strong. Off-screen, Melissa was adjusting to sudden fame, long shooting days, and the unpredictable rhythm of growing up on camera. At first, the set of Little House felt magical. Felt like being part of a real family. Michael Landon, who played her father Charles Ingalls and also served as producer and writer, became a major guiding force in her career. Cast and crew described the environment as warm and supportive, even when filming under the hot California sun or enduring the pressures of a tight production schedule. For a young girl, it was a dream come true. She was working alongside beloved actors, telling wholesome stories, and becoming a household name in living rooms across America. And the show was a hit. Fans adored the Ingalls family. They tuned in weekly not just for prairie adventures, but for heart. There was something deeply comforting about the show's simplicity. The love between family members, the faith in small-town values, and the resilience in the face of hardship. For Melissa, it felt like she was part of something meaningful. The storylines were often gentle, full of lessons and moral depth. Even the challenges her character faced early on were grounded in tenderness with the sibling dynamics, school struggles, and quiet moments of growing up. But then, things began to shift. It was during one early episode, long before the worst had even begun, that Melissa Sue Anderson experienced something so intense, so personally unsettling, that she never forgot it. It wasn't violent or graphic. In fact, it was subtle, emotional, and quietly devastating. But it stayed with her. And to this day, that one particular episode from 1974 remains locked away in her memory. It was one she refused to watch again. So what happened in that episode? And why does Melissa still avoid it all these years later? The answer lies in a heartbreaking story that changed how she saw the role, and maybe even herself. Let's dig in. The unforgettable Melissa Sue Anderson was just a child when she joined one of the most beloved television families in American history. Cast as Mary Ingalls in Little House on the Prairie, she quickly became a fan favorite. With her calm demeanor, soft voice, and thoughtful eyes, Anderson brought a gentle strength to her role that made audiences connect deeply with Mary. But what the viewers didn't see was the emotional toll that some of these storylines had on the young actress behind the scenes. One episode in particular, filmed in 1974, affected her so deeply that, even decades later, she still refuses to watch it. Though it centered more on Melissa Gilbert's character, Laura Ingalls, than on Mary, the episode was emotionally heavy for the entire cast. The story revolves around Laura's jealousy after her mother gives birth to a baby boy. Charles Jr. The family is thrilled at the arrival of the new baby, but Laura struggles to cope with the sudden shift in attention. She becomes consumed with guilt after she wishes her brother gone. And then he actually suddenly falls ill and dies. Laura is devastated, believing her selfish thoughts caused his death. She runs away into the mountains, where she meets a mysterious man who helps guide her toward forgiveness and healing. This episode stands out for several reasons. First, It was one of the earliest instances in the series where themes of death, grief, and inner emotional turmoil were explored in such depth. For many viewers, it was a turning point. The show was no longer just a sweet period drama about farm life. It was willing to touch darker emotional corners of the human experience. For Melissa Sue Anderson, even though Mary wasn't the central character in this particular episode, being on set and immersed in the emotional intensity of the scenes had a lasting impact. Children in Hollywood often face unique pressures. They're expected to deliver adult-level performances while still developing emotionally themselves. Anderson was no exception. She later described the environment on set as professional and warm, especially in the early seasons, but also acknowledged the emotional weight of certain storylines. What made The Lord is My Shepherd particularly hard was how real the grief felt. Losing a child is a horrifying concept, even when it's fictional. Watching her younger co-stars portray such raw grief, and being surrounded by actors crying and mourning for a baby that never truly existed, blurred the lines between performance and genuine emotion. Sources close to the show, along with her own reflections on the emotional toll of early episodes, suggest that this was the beginning of a pattern. It was the first time she saw how deeply the show would mine tragedy for emotional weight. As the seasons went on, Mary's storylines grew even more tragic. In Season 4, Mary goes blind after a bout with scarlet fever. For Anderson, it was a challenging shift. No longer just the big sister or voice of reason in the family, Mary became the center of some of the series' darkest story arcs. From adjusting to life as a blind teenager to becoming a teacher at a school for the blind, Anderson had to embody resilience, frustration, sadness, and growth. All these while still being a teenager herself. But you will be stunned to know that's the least of it all. One of the most devastating moments in the entire series occurred when Mary and her husband Adam lose their newborn child in a fire. In Season 6, the scenes were heartbreaking to watch, and even more heartbreaking to film. Anderson has since spoken out about the emotional toll this storyline took on her. In an interview with People magazine, she said, "When they run low on story ideas, someone says, 'What can we do to Melissa Sue that's really awful?' That sentence alone reveals just how emotionally taxed she had become by the direction of her character. Unlike most child actors of the time who faded from the spotlight quietly, Anderson chose to step away on her own terms. She left the show after Season 7, despite her character being deeply woven into the fabric of the Ingalls family. The emotional toll had mounted to a point where continuing felt unhealthy. What started as a joyful experience filled with learning, growth, and camaraderie had gradually evolved into something painful and draining. The show's shift toward more tragic, intense plotlines meant that Anderson was often expected to carry the emotional burden of entire episodes. In a time before therapy for child actors was common or encouraged, Anderson was left to process much of that emotional weight on her own. She has since spoken with a great deal of affection about the cast and crew. She credited the show for giving her a solid foundation in acting. But she also acknowledges the price she paid. Being asked, over and over, to portray grief, fear, and helplessness as a child wasn't something she took lightly. It shaped her career, but it also changed the way she saw herself and her limits. Little House on the Prairie is still remembered fondly by generations of fans. It has a legacy of love, perseverance, and family values. But behind those sunlit memories are shadows that many never saw. For Melissa Sue Anderson, the trauma of portraying relentless suffering, from going blind to losing a child, was real, even if the circumstances were fictional. To this day, Anderson has never publicly rewatched that episode. Not because it was poorly made or difficult to act, but because it opened a door to a side of storytelling that felt too heavy, too real, and too much for a young girl to carry. Her departure from the show didn't stop her from continuing her acting career. She went on to appear in several TV films and guest star in other series, but she always carried the lessons and the emotional battle scars of her time on Little House. In interviews and her memoir, Anderson has been open about the challenges of being a young actress in an emotionally intense role, and how choosing to leave was an act of reclaiming her own peace. To her, The Lord is my shepherd because a memory she's chosen to leave in the past. But who in the first place is Melissa Anderson? Hang on as we unveil her personality. The child star before she became a household name through her quiet strength on Little House on the Prairie, Melissa Sue Anderson was just a regular little girl growing up in the suburbs of Los Angeles. Born on September 26, 1962, in Berkeley, California, Melissa Sue was the younger of two daughters. Her family moved to Southern California when she was still quite young, which would eventually open the door to the Hollywood world just a few miles away. Melissa wasn't a child of showbiz royalty or even someone born into a performance-driven family. In fact, her parents divorced when she was still in elementary school, and her mother raised her and her sister mostly on her own. It was Melissa's ballet teacher, of all people, who first noticed her unique camera presence. She suggested that her mother get her a talent agent. That one comment, made in passing, would change the course of Melissa's life forever. By the time she was 8 years old, Melissa was already appearing in commercials. Her delicate features and expressive eyes made her ideal for products that required a soft, trustworthy face. But she wasn't just a pretty child. She had talent. And soon enough, the TV industry noticed. Her first television role came in 1972 when she landed a guest spot on Bewitched. This was followed by roles on The Brady Bunch, Shaft, and The Love Boat. Her ability to handle emotional material even as a young girl set her apart from the sea of child actors flooding casting calls in the 70s. But everything truly shifted in 1974, when she was cast as Mary Ingalls in Little House on the Prairie. Though we won't revisit the tragedies tied to that role, it's important to understand that this show launched her into international fame almost overnight. What's less known, however, is what came next. After her time on Little House, Anderson deliberately steered her career in a direction that would allow her to grow out of the shadow of Mary Ingalls. She wanted to show casting directors, and the world, that she wasn't just a tear-stained character trapped in the 1800s. She could do more, and she did. In the early 1980s, she began appearing in television movies that pushed her into more complex roles. In 1980, she starred in Survival of Dana, a made-for-TV drama where she played a teenager who transfers to a public high school and falls into the wrong crowd. The film allowed Anderson to explore a modern character facing real-world challenges, and it helped distance her from her former image. She continued taking on bold roles throughout the 80s. In 1981, she appeared in the horror film Happy Birthday to Me, one of her first theatrical movie roles. Though horror wasn't her natural genre, it was a deliberate choice, a way to prove her range. Audiences and critics alike noted that she brought subtlety and depth even to a genre often accused of being shallow. She also took on roles in shows like The Equalizer, She Wrote, Chips, and Alfred Hitchcock Presents. These guest appearances helped remind audiences that Anderson wasn't a one-note actor. She could bring complexity and heart to almost any setting, from period dramas to crime procedurals. What truly defined her post-Little House career wasn't necessarily the number of roles she played, but the dignity with which she managed her transition from child star to adult actress. Unlike many of her contemporaries who fell into scandal or disappeared altogether, Anderson stayed steady, even if she stepped back from the limelight at times. In 1990, she married Michael Sloan, a television writer and producer best known for his work on The Equalizer. Their relationship was far from a Hollywood tabloid circus. It was private, intentional, and centered around family. The couple had 2 children, a daughter named Piper and a son named Griffin. Anderson largely took a step back from full-time acting during the years her children were young, focusing instead on being a hands-on parent. In interviews, she's spoken openly about the challenges and rewards of stepping away from the spotlight. She didn't regret it. In fact, it gave her a sense of peace. For someone who'd grown up in front of the camera, being able to live quietly and raise her children without constant scrutiny was a gift. Her family later moved to Montreal, Canada, where they lived for several years. During that time, she became a naturalized Canadian citizen in 2007, while still retaining her American citizenship. The move to Canada wasn't about running from fame. It was about pursuing a quieter, more grounded lifestyle where her children could grow up outside the glare of celebrity. Despite her retreat from mainstream Hollywood, Anderson didn't completely vanish. She occasionally returned to TV in special guest roles or documentaries. In 1998, she played First Lady Megan Hollister in the TV miniseries 10.5, and in 2006, she made a rare but celebrated return to the small screen in an episode of Veronica Mars. In 2010, Melissa Sue Anderson gave fans a rare behind-the-scenes look into her life and career through her memoir titled The Way I See It, a look back at my life on Little House. The book was an honest, sharp, and heartfelt reflection on what it meant to grow up in front of millions. It peeled back the polished veneer of childhood stardom. This, of course, gave readers a peek into the hard work, personal struggles, and inner strength it took to survive and thrive after the cameras stopped rolling. Throughout her career, Anderson earned respect not just for her performances, but for her professionalism. In 1978, she received a Primetime Emmy Award nomination for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Drama Series, a rare honor for someone her age. She was also awarded a Young Artist Award for her contributions to youth in entertainment and received nominations across various television platforms. But perhaps one of the most remarkable things about Anderson is her conscious refusal to chase fame for fame's sake. In an industry that often burns out its brightest stars, Anderson chose a different path. She maintained her integrity, protected her mental health, and kept her family life sacred. She has occasionally attended reunions, charity events, and documentaries tied to Little House on the Prairie, but she's done so on her own terms. There's no desperation to reclaim the spotlight, no gimmicks to stay relevant. She's simply Melissa, a former actress, a mother, a wife, and a woman who has lived many lives in one lifetime. From a shy girl dancing in ballet shoes to a household name on one of America's most beloved series. From a teenage actress navigating the rough terrain of Hollywood to a woman who found peace in simplicity. And maybe that's what makes her so unforgettable. She didn't need the noise of fame to leave a legacy. Her grace spoke louder than any scandal, any paparazzi flash, or any TV comeback ever could. However, there's more to Anderson that's beyond Hollywood. Life beyond Hollywood in an industry that feeds on staying visible and relevant. Melissa Sue Anderson, despite having all these at her fingertips, stepped away. And this wasn't because of a scandal, burnout, not in bitterness. She simply left contentedly. After spending much of her formative years under the bright glare of cameras and public attention, Anderson chose to retreat into a life that would seem utterly foreign to the average child star. She moved to Canada to build her family by spending time with her husband, Michael Landon, and her kids, and develop herself. Melissa Sue Anderson's love story is as grounded as her life choices. In 1990, she married television producer Michael Sloan, and together they chose a path far from the chaos of Hollywood. Anderson and Sloan raised their 2 children, Piper and Griffin, in Canada. Their relationship was one of the few that didn't come with scandals. It was just a steady, lasting partnership. After more than 3 decades of marriage, the two remain a rare example of enduring love in the entertainment world. For Anderson, love was never about the spotlight. By the early 1990s, long after Little House on the Prairie had faded from television screens, Melissa Sue was already miles ahead, emotionally, physically, and philosophically. While many of her peers continued to chase roles, battle typecasting, or manage the remnants of fame, she recalibrated her life. For Anderson, fame was never the prize. It was something she'd experienced, even enjoyed at moments, but never needed to define herself. In interviews over the years, she never expressed disdain for acting, nor did she make dramatic declarations against Hollywood. She simply made the quiet decision to live differently. Unlike many actors who oscillate between private and public lives, Anderson made her choice firm. Her fans weren't left confused by mixed messages. There was no reality show comeback, no tell-all memoir, and no desperate attempt to reclaim the spotlight. Her story became less about what she left behind and more about the wholeness she gained. Relocating to Canada was more psychological. The move allowed Anderson to build a life rooted in authenticity. She focused on raising her children, cultivating friendships away from the lens, and investing in causes that meant something to her on a personal level. There was something refreshingly human about that. She transitioned from Hollywood's scripted chaos to a home where decisions weren't made based on camera angles or audience ratings. And while she occasionally dipped back into voice work or smaller roles, they were exceptions, not comebacks. Her life was no longer about acting. It was about living. Contrary to what tabloids might imagine, Anderson didn't become a recluse. She didn't disappear. She simply stopped performing for the public. When she did appear, perhaps at a nostalgic Little House event or an anniversary tribute, it was with poise on her terms. She wasn't clinging to the past. She was honoring it while standing firmly in the present. Today, Melissa Sue Anderson lives a life many would envy. Not because of glitz or glamour, but because of its sweet richness. She gardens. She travels. She raises her family. She laughs without a script and cries without an audience. Her world is real, grounded, and personal. Most people are uncomfortable with boundaries, especially when set by public figures. We expect access. We expect nostalgia. We want celebrities to share, reflect, and perform. Melissa Sue Anderson disrupts that expectation with grace. Her boundary was balanced. She doesn't speak negatively about her time on Little House. She's proud of the work, grateful for the fans, and kind in her retrospectives.